So as we were going into this year, we were talking about inaugurating a new award. We wanted to present a Humanitarian Award to a person who's worked tirelessly and selflessly for the betterment of society with the awareness of those achievements being amplified through film. And obviously the subject of tonight's film just struck us as the perfect person for this. Outside of his achievements with the Equal Justice Initiative, which you've seen a lot of in this film, and then also he'll talk a little bit about where it's gone from there. He's also initiated major anti-poverty and anti-discrimination efforts that challenge inequality in America, and led the creation of two highly acclaimed cultural sites, the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. These are institutions that chronicle the legacies of slavery, lynching, and racial segregation, and the connections to mass incarceration and contemporary issues of racial bias. I'm so honored to give the inaugural Humanitarian Award to Mr. Bryan Stevenson.
Thank you all so much. I continue to do what I do because I don't think the question of capital punishment in this country can be determined by asking whether people deserve to die for the crimes they've committed. I think the threshold question is, do we deserve to kill? And if we have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent, if we allow our system to be compromised by racial bias and discrimination against the poor and the disfavored, if we tolerate the kind of error and misjudgment that we saw reflected in the McMillan case and so many cases, I don't think we deserve to kill. And I am determined that we can create more justice. There is a justice deficit in this country. And I think to correct that, to challenge that, we have to do more. We are doing work now at the Equal Justice Initiative on race, because I don't think we're free. I think we're burdened by this long history of racial inequality that we've inherited. Walter McMillan was convicted because he was presumed dangerous and guilty, and that presumption of dangerousness and guilt burdens black and brown people in this country in ways that's exhausting. I'm getting old enough to tell you that when you have to keep navigating these presumptions of dangerousness and guilt, it can wear you out. And so I just believe there's something better waiting for us. There's something that feels more like freedom, that feels more like equality than what we've experienced in this country. But to get there, we've got some work to do. And I'm excited about this film because I hope it will encourage people, inspire people to join us in that work. I have really challenging days doing the work that I do. There are times when you get a little overwhelmed. There are times when you get a little disoriented. We've been working on helping children prosecuted as adults. It's been a big campaign since this work started 30 years ago. And every now and then I get a little kind of turned around because I don't understand how our judges have the power to turn children into adults for the purposes of prosecuting them. And I was working on a case not too long ago where I had a 14-year-old client who'd been certified to stand trial as an adult, and it got really frustrating to me when I would go see this client. He was just a child, and he had a child's confusion about what was happening to him. And I got home late that night, and I was so kind of disturbed by it all. I started thinking, well, how does the judge have the power to turn a child into an adult? And I started thinking, in my sleep-deprived state, that if the judge has that power, the judge must be magical. The judge must be all-powerful. And I started thinking, well, if I'm a good lawyer, I need to ask that judge to use that power, that magic, to help my client rather than hurt my client. And I started thinking about writing this motion, and I began imagining the identity I wanted my client to have, and I wrote this motion, and I titled the motion, Motion to try my poor 14-year-old black male client like a rich 75-year-old corporate white executive. And I put in my motion all the reasons why I wanted him to have that identity rather than this identity. And I talked about the police misconduct and the prosecutorial misconduct and the judicial misconduct. There was a line in this motion about how there's no conduct in this county, there's just misconduct. And the next morning I woke up and I thought, man, that was a crazy dream I had about writing that crazy motion. And then I looked in my file and I realized it wasn't a dream. I'd actually written a motion, and not only that, I'd sent the motion to court. A couple months later, it was time to go to court on this case, and I opened the file and I thought, oh God, this is the case where I filed that insane motion. And I drove down to this county to argue this motion, and I knew it was going to be really challenging. I was feeling kind of tired. And I sat in my car, and then I opened the door to get out. And when I went up the steps to this courthouse, there was an older black man who was the janitor. And when he saw me coming into the court, he looked at me and he said, who are you? I said, I'm a lawyer. I'm here to argue the motion. He said, you're a lawyer? I said, yes, sir. And that's when this man came over to me and he hugged me. And then he said, I want you to know I'm so proud of you. And it just completely moved me. And I walked into the courtroom and the judge was on the bench and he saw me walking in there and he got really angry. He said, Mr. Stevenson, did you write this crazy motion? I said, yes, sir, I did. And I started arguing about why I think we have to do better than tolerate inequality, why we have to treat the poor more fairly, why we have to overcome this legacy of racism and bigotry. And people were piling into the courtroom as I was making these arguments, and they were all angry that I was talking about these issues. And at some point, I turned around, and the courtroom was packed full of people, prosecutors and assistant clerk workers, and they were just glaring at me angrily, and I felt really alone, but I kept arguing. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw that older black man, the janitor, who had greeted me so lovingly, pacing outside the door. He kept looking through the window. And finally, after 20 minutes, this older black man opened the door, walked into the courtroom, and sat down behind me. I kept arguing, and about a few minutes later, the judge said we would take a recess. And when we took a recess, there was a deputy sheriff who was angry that the janitor had come into court. And he went over to that deputy, to that older black man, the janitor, and he went over to him and he said, Jimmy, what are you doing in this courtroom? And that's when this older black man stood up and he looked at me, and he looked at the deputy, and he said, I came into this courtroom to tell this young man, you keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. And more than anything, I am honored to receive an award, but mostly I'm honored when people are prepared to stand, to fight, to lift their voices, and encouraging those of us who are trying to keep our eyes on the prize. We have a long way to go to create justice where we need it, but I am persuaded we can do it, and I'm excited to be able to share in that process people like you who hear the story, who know this story, who talk about this story, and the extraordinary cast and creative people that I've had the privilege of working with during this project. So I want to thank the Film Festival for having our film. I want to thank you for this award and recognition. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight.
So I guess I wanted to start by asking the three of you, I guess it starts in the writing, but I feel, I can only imagine you feel a tremendous responsibility when you're taking on a true story and real people's lives. And I wanted to know from each of you about the research you did, both, you know, in talking to Bryan, but also in talking, if there were other people you spoke with, if there were other people involved in the story that you got material from. How was that process for you?
I just want to say, because I don't think that Bryan can ever get enough praise, that he's been going to these festivals and he's been feted quite deservedly time and time again. And then when you ask him, well, what are you doing tonight? He's writing a brief. It's just extraordinary. And I guess that's a good segue into, and I'm, you know, Karan and Andrew will speak to this as well, but the humility that all of us feel in just being able to participate in the telling of this story sets a high bar. You really don't want to fall short because Bryan's work has been so impactful. And that's not even to mention, so Bryan is up here, and then there's Destin, our writer-director, and Michael B. Jordan, who produced this movie with him, and Jamie Foxx, and their day in and day out devotion to the telling of this story. And so, yeah, the bar is very high. And very quickly, I guess in my case, the demands of physical transformation with a character, you know, a real life person, and to try and get that right in a humanizing rather than a vilifying way, you know, just was made all the more important by the integrity of the script and most of all by the integrity of Bryan and what he's up to. And now I've bloviated enough, then I'll hand it over to Karan.
What he said. When I saw the image of Minnie McMillan, and when I saw a very short video clip, I saw my grandmother, and I thought, how many times have we been able to experience this particular voice in this way? To see a Southern Black woman as more than just a strong Black woman, but as a person who is fighting and healing and afraid and brave and courageous and confused all at the same time. So I really wanted to honor her voice. I think I entered thinking, how can I best serve the telling of her story? And then to come on set and work with, like, I remember the courtroom scene. I remember filming the courtroom scene with Tim, who I had not met before or worked with before this project. And when he finished testifying, I said, thank you. That wasn't in the script. But just the power of the work he was doing, the honesty, the integrity with which he was working, it just came out of my mouth before I knew it. It was unspoken on set, but I think we all carried this idea, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we were carrying precious cargo. And so we all wanted to handle these people and this story with care. And we all, I think, wanted to honor Bryan and his work. I briefly considered going to law school and moving to Alabama, and I put me in coach because the work he's doing is so incredible. You want to just jump in and help. But I was like, no, from where I stand, what I can do is honor the storytelling. So we wanted to honor his work as well.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough not only to work with Destin, Daniel Cretton on some other projects, but also to consider him a close friend. And when he first started talking about the project, along with Gil and Asher and Michael B., reading Bryan's work and then delving into who he is as a person and the things he's doing in the country, it's impossible not to be overwhelmingly moved by everything that he's doing. I also knew right at the beginning that this isn't my story, or a story that's going to be told in my voice. But I had a real belief that the message of Destin's work and Destin as a person that he wants to bring to the world with his films matched Bryan's voice. And I think he must have felt the same thing in order to allow Destin to be a part of it. So we did all of the regular research things over 2 years. We went to EJI, we interviewed everyone, but we also knew right from the beginning that he was going to be very hands-on, and I don't think either of us would have would have ever gotten into it if it wasn't for that kind of belief and knowledge. He would give us, we would have notes calls, just the three of us for a day, and then I would transcribe every word that he said, and just the way he speaks in passing and is just as moving and an intensely profound experience as the way he speaks when he's on the stage.
I wanted to ask you about the hands-on nature, because I can only imagine how this entire process has been for you. Were there stipulations that were very important to you? Were you like, it has to be Michael? Was it, you know?
I think for me what was important is that it stayed true to the lives of the people we would be depicting, and that was a process, and it was great to work with people who were so open and so creative, and we did things that I think were innovative in a lot of ways, and in fact one of those things, I'd like to just take a second to acknowledge. So one of the things that happened early on in the process is that we talked about the possibility of involving some of my clients in the actual film. And so the early scene where Michael, Bryan, still haven't figured out how to talk about that, where he goes to the prison and he meets the first prisoners on death row, or the first prisoners in the institution, leading up to the scene with Rob Morgan as Herbert, and then the scene with Jamie as Walt McMillan. There were 4 people in that scene, and they are all actual clients of mine who spent time in prison. One of them was a young man who had been horribly abused and ended up in prison for nearly a quarter century. I got involved in his case. We finally got him out, and after he got out of prison, he actually came to this area. He graduated from my alma mater, Eastern College, and today he's doing reentry work for people in this area. And I think he's here tonight, and I would just love to celebrate David Garlock, who I hope is in the audience.